To focus on Liberia. Welcome to yet another edition of Chemistry and Society. My name is Dennis Ja, and we are broadcasting from Atlanta, Georgia. We want to welcome you all to this edition of Chemistry and Society, wherever you are watching. Share the show, invite a friend, and let's talk chemistry. At this time, I'm going to turn over to the presenter of the show, Mr. Saki Golafale, rather, Dr. Saki Golafale. Dr. Golafale is all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Jad. Thank you. Is as I'm excited that we are here again today. Viewers, wherever you are, good afternoon, good evening, good morning. My name is Saki Golafale, and you're watching Focus on Africa. I'm sorry, you're watching Focus on Liberia. And this program is Chemistry and Society. So today we're talking about chemistry of vaccines development. And we have on our show today two outstanding Liberian scientists and scholars who will introduce themselves very soon. But just to give you a background on what we're talking about today. So exactly 20 years after the U.S. declared independence, a very brilliant British scientist by the name of Dr. Edward Jenner, he developed a vaccine that revolutionized the whole science of vaccine development. That was for the smallpox. And today, based on WHO, WHO has declared smallpox eradicated. And of course, smallpox was the very first, up to today, is the first disease that are ever eradicated by vaccines. So there have been a lot of development in the vaccine industry. And we've seen the rabies vaccine that was developed by Louis Pasteur. And we've also seen BCG, which is used basically for tuberculosis vaccine. And of course, the MMR vaccine that we use. So a lot of things. One of the most commonly used vaccines in Africa, the polio vaccine that was used in Liberia, in Germany, in Australia, and around the world. So today we're talking about vaccine and the innovation, the chemistry, the biochemistry, and all of the science involved. So our knowledge of the basic subdisciplines of the sciences, particularly molecular biology, biochemistry, and biotechnology, we'll be talking about all these things that involve the different sciences that connect together to develop vaccines, and also bringing to our viewers some of the basic information you want to know about how vaccine is developed, what are the content of vaccine. So there are a lot of questions you may want to ask about vaccine development. And some of the people who've taken vaccine, you may not know what the vaccine contains. So we have two of our Liberian scientists here, Mr. Kalilu Donzo and Dr. Dougbeh Nyan, who will be speaking to us based on their expert, background in these areas. But before we go into the show, we would like to introduce our guests. We'll ask our guests to introduce themselves so you can know exactly their background and why indeed this topic is important. So I would like to welcome our two guests, Dr. Nyan. Welcome to the show. Mr. Kalilu Falika, welcome.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Yeah, so we'll start our introduction, and I will turn over to Mr. Donzo to tell our viewers who he is. Who is Mr. Donzo? What is he doing?
Oh, all right. I'm Kalilu. At the moment, I'm a Chevening scholar. I'm studying biomedical science at the University of Plymouth. And back home, I lecture at the University of Liberia. Yeah. So I have a BSc in biology, and I have my first MSc in biotechnology. So now I'm doing my second master in infection immunity. Yeah. Thank you.
Great. That's an outstanding profile, and we'll talk more about your area of interest in research, infection and immunity as the program progresses. So we'll now turn over to Dr. Nyan. Tell our viewers who is Dr. Nyan. We've heard his name, and our people still want to know who is Dr. Nyan and what is he doing presently.
Again, my name is Dougbeh Nyan. I studied medicine in Germany at the University of Berlin Medical Faculty, and practiced for a while. And I was recruited by the National Institute of Health, where I was trained as a biomedical research scientist in infectious diseases. and continue my training at the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine. I work with various biotech companies. I work at the NIH, which is the National Institute of Health, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the Naval Medical Research Center. And in all of these areas, I work in infectious diseases and immunity. Specifically, I work with Staphylococcus infection. I work with Helicobacter pylori. I work with HIV, the hepatitis viruses, and multiple other viruses, and ultimately came out with an invention to detect many viruses with one test. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. That's incredible. Those big scientific names we'll talk about them as we go on. But Mr. Ja, what's your impression? Two Liberians doing such great work.
And we are so excited to have Dr. Dougbeh Christopher Nyan, who I've known personally, and also a graduate of Monrovia College, my alma mater. We also want to welcome for the first time also Mr. Kalilu Donzo, who's joining us from the UK. So I'm excited, about their accomplishment and what they are doing, especially in the field of chemistry, in the field of science. I studied in high school chemistry and I was very good, but I didn't understand it, even though I made very good grades. So I'm excited about chemistry and society, and I'm excited about what these fellow Liberians are bringing to the discussion.
Great. Well, they mostly into medicine, infectious disease, but I'm the chemistry guy, so I'm bringing them together to know how chemistry fit into some of the work they do. Especially with Dr. Nyan as an inventor, some of the things he's done and what he's doing, and Mr. Donzo, who's working his research areas in infection and immunity. So I will start with Dr. Nyan, and let's get the ball rolling, because this is a very hot topic these days, considering COVID-19. We'll come to that in some part of our program. So Dr. Nyan, our viewers would like to know, there's a lot of issues about vaccines, and so what is a vaccine and what are they used for? Let's talk about it, and also talk about a brief history of vaccines.
Well, vaccines in general are substances produced and applied to us humans and animals as well, for the purpose of eliciting protection against, help our body to produce more of the infections, to produce more of the defense mechanisms that we have. And as a rate, we are able to mount enough. Besides our normal defenses, we are able to mount more response when we are infected by particular pathogens. Among the pathogens, we have viruses, we have bacteria, and many other pathogens that we come in contact with which we are infected. Let's take, for example, tuberculosis. We get infected through respiratory means, through our nose and those kind of things. If an infected person who has tuberculosis breathes out and you take that in, you become infected. We'll not go through the nitty-gritty mechanisms. Yeah. But then our body tends to fight back. But it's our natural response is not sufficient enough to overcome the overwhelming effect of the bacteria or the virus. And so when vaccines are produced, they then help us to build more of those defenses, so that the next time we come in contact, or those who have never come in contact with it, or whenever we come in contact with that particular organisms, our body then recognizes that this is what I was building my defense for. So we're able to then fight back.
Good. So talking about defense, building the body's defense, I think that's related to the immunity, the body's immune system. We'll talk about that briefly when I'll come to Mr. Donzo to talk about the issue of immunity and defense. But importantly, let's look at the historicity of vaccine development. we go back to the 17th century when Dr. Edward Jenner developed the smallpox vaccine, and just by taking a pus from the cow's spot, on the cow from a cow that was thought to have cowpox. So one of his theory was that anyone who contracts cowpox is most likely not to contract smallpox. So he tested his theory, and it showed some positive, it showed improvement, and that was the groundbreaking development of vaccine. And the smallpox today has been eradicated. It's basically the only disease that has been eradicated by vaccine. Looking at where we've come from, scientists working, what's your thought about the whole history of vaccine and the whole innovation in research that's ongoing right now?
As you rightly put it, Edward Jenner was the innovator. He's the pioneer of vaccinology, if we can put it that way. To stress that and make a few corrections and give him his accolades, he is the first person to have done observational studies. He is the first scientist to have done clinical studies as we see it today. Usually, the milkmaids, as they call them in England those days, those who went to milk the cow, these cows were infected with this, pox virus. And it was noticed that this pox virus will also infect humans. So when we have this whole situation of zoonotic infection, meaning that the animals being infected and the animal infection transferring to humans started to be observed way back in the days, around 1790s, the 1780s to the 1790s. So these maids always had this pox, infection. So his thinking was, well, there are other pox viruses or there are other pox infections. So if we had to take the pus from this and then probably just infect a child with it, not the whole pus, but just a little bit of it, our body could be able to recognize that and build some sort of response against that. And then when these children are then infected or come in contact with the pox virus, they would have already had immunity. So he tried that on a 6 to 7 year old boy, 9 year old boy. He tried that, it worked. Then he tried it on another person. He observed them where the observational study came in. It worked. Then he did his own clinical trial. So he started to now document what was happening, just as we found today, where people go through documentation, where he found that that trial he did was safe and then it was effective. Two of the major criteria that we look for in production of vaccine and, of course, by extension, production of medication. So after Jenner, then came Pasteur. Pasteur, he came with the toxin. Okay, now there is a little argument in between there, whether what Pasteur did was a vaccine or it was just an antitoxin. So
we could go. It's a long discussion. We could go into that and all of the politics involved.
Exactly.
But we're going to concentrate on the science and pick up from where you just talked about, Mr. Donzo. The issue of immunity was the common word used from Dr. Nyan, and considering your background in infection and immunity, with the development of vaccine, with the history that Dr. Nyan talked about, the Dr. Jenner used the cowpox, and today we've seen a lot of innovation in vaccine. And in regards to infection and immunity, what's your take?
Well, thank you. First of all, if we talk about infection, we are talking about agent that causes a particular disease. So when we talk about infection and immunity, we're talking about those agents like a virus, like a bacteria, like a fungi, causing infection to the body. So what's the body response? That the immunity aspect. What the body does, body will recognize that particular infection agent that enter into the body because it's a foreign agent. So what the body will build or immune response to that particular pathogen that come into the body. But the point about it, we have two types of immunity. We have two types. We have the innate and we have the adaptive immunity. The innate immunity is what that it's what we acquire from birth. Meaning, once there's an infection, automatically our innate immunity, the immune cells, the red blood cells, the macrophage, all these cells work to go to that particular infection and try to neutralize it and get rid of it. And sometimes they use some chemicals. So we have innate immunity. So if that pathogen managed to cross that barrier and then manage to live and cross that barrier and break the barrier of the innate aspect of the immunity, then you go into the adaptive aspect. So the adaptive aspect now, the innate immune cell has to communicate with the adaptive immune cells in order to build a memory for that particular pathogen. So what's happening in terms of vaccine production, what really happened there, what they're trying to do, they will get a particular a particle of that infectious agent, what a virus, what a bacteria, any kind of agent of it, and introduce it into your body. Once they introduce it into your body, it will mimic, it will be like that agent into your body. So once they enter into your body will recognize that particular agent and try to build a memory to remember that particular pathogen. So in the future, once that pathogen infects you, automatically your body already have that antibody to neutralize that pathogen so that it can cause this harm to your body. So that's where the infection immunity come about. So how the infection agent enter the body, how your body fight the infection to neutralize them or to kill them. Yeah, that's how.
The key thing we'll come to next, talking about how the vaccine and the body chemistry come together and they work. We'll talk about that later. But a key thing you talk about two types of immunity and the innate immunity. So a general question: why wouldn't the body be able to fight by itself? Why do we need vaccine? If we have, can we use our natural body, immune mechanism, defense system to fight? Why do we need vaccine?
Yeah, the point about it, most of the pathogen, they have signature. Those signature, these are the virulent factors. They got different signature that are used to conquer your body. So once you are not immune compromised, you don't have any kind of underlying condition, obviously your body can fight that particular pathogen. But sometimes these pathogens, they mutate. They change their form. They study your body. They see where you are smart to kill them. They try to shield themselves so that they can live into your body, because viruses, they need a whole cell.
Yeah.
So they form mechanism in a way that they can able to shut down your system in order to invade your cells and damage it. That's their intent. So
just to take from you on that, I think recently they discovered that there are two different strains of the coronavirus. But we will leave that. Yeah, Dr. Nyan, what's your take?
Well, to take off from there, when we come in contact with these infectious pathogens, the first thing we build is this, what we call the immune globulin. We build IgM first. Just take note, IgM and IgG. So we build IgM first. Those are the infantry that comes out to fight to combat the particular invading agent. Then later on in the process, our body begin to build and send, more military people, as I'll call them, the IgGs, to come and help in the fight. And those IgG live on for a long time. And just as Kalilu said, our body then begin to kind of take into consideration that, okay, I can maintain my IgG for life, if that is possible, or given a particular agent, my IgG can come down. So I could become infected again. And that is why it's under that condition that we introduce the vaccines, so that, and these vaccines are made either from the very pathogen, what we call attenuate them, we make them weaker, and they're alive, but they are weak. They don't cause the kind of disease that they would have caused. So we introduce that, and then your body recognizes it as, it's coming to infect me again. But no, it's not coming to infect you because it's very weak. Then we build more immunity and memory cells. So that's the aspect of it. Now, what happens is, look at coronavirus, for example, and look at HIV. Why is that been so difficult to create a vaccine against HIV, for example? Because of its constant changes that it carries out in itself, okay, in its genetic material. It constantly changes itself. So our body becomes fooled. It fools our body not to recognize it. That's what makes it difficult. With coronavirus that we have presently, there's one.
We're going to talk about coronavirus later. Okay. But let me bring in Mr. Ja.
Yes,
coronavirus is a hot topic right now. We'll talk about that. Let's reserve our energy for that. But, Mr. Ja, you've listened to our guests, how brilliantly they've presented the case about vaccine and the issue of immunity. You probably took vaccines when you were young, like a baby, like BCG vaccine.
I can show you.
And hepatitis. What question do you have for our guests?
Yeah, here's my first question. First of all, as they explain this, because I'm not from that background, but I'm using what I know, right? I'm from an IT background. So it tells me, because that's the same viruses bad people use to attack our computers. So they recognize that we have all our antivirus software. So what they do, they change it. They come in different forms. So the people that are defending these viruses in the computer have to keep building them. They have to keep changing. So that's one aspect I'm able to understand what they're saying. Two, if from the military side, even though I'm not a military person, is that things are coming to attack your body. So Kalilu talk about the first defense, which is our natural defense. But then the viruses, those agents get so strong, they break them. So you go to the second line of defense. And then Dr. Nyan talk about this, the reinforcement that comes, the IgG, and say, well, more things coming, so let's build up to go fight them. My question is, you introduce the vaccine and in the body, you put the weaker part of those agents in your body. Now your body say, oh, there's a vaccine, and I start to fight them. And so build up more immunity. My question is, how long does that last? Is it a lifetime? Does it come a point that this thing get weaker and then the virus is going to penetrate?
So it depends. If I can just take off from there and shift it over. It depends. Just as we explained, some of these we are able to build lasting immunity, but for some of them, there has to be a second or a third course or dose of the vaccination, which we call booster. Take MMR, mumps, measles, and rubella, for example, which are these childhood diseases. We have a schedule that is laid out, given the country in which you come from, by which the pediatric population is vaccinated. So there is a schedule. For some vaccination, we build long-term immunity, but for some, there has to be a booster. There have to be a second dose or a third dose. I will shift it over to Kalilu to continue from there.
All right. So basically, you have to know the composition of the vaccine. If you talk about the live vaccine, we weaken the virus. In the live vaccine, that have longer duration of remembering that particular pathogen. Then the attenuated forms of the one that is attenuated, that one have shorter duration to remember. So it depends the chemistry of the vaccine. You come back to the topic, depends the chemistry of the vaccine, right? Yeah, so some vaccine, you give the vaccine like a flu vaccine. You have to give it every year because it will not last for like 12 months. Some vaccine go for lifetime. Some vaccine like a polio, polio like a polio group of lifetime. Some vaccine will go for 12 months. So it depends the infection agent involved in the disease. So it depends. Yeah.
Good. It's good that you talk about the chemistry, because that would be our next talk about the different components that are in the vaccine that make it effective.
Dr. Golafale,
Yeah.
before you get there, because I'm using my background to understand this, since I'm not in that area. So I come from a background where where my grandfathers and the rest of the people, they prepare what I later understood in life as vaccines. One of those things, they give you a mark. They say you're getting gun proof, or if this sickness come, we'll cut your flesh and put some charms in it, and that's like to protect you from certain diseases. Or they cook for you and say, even though I never participated, but these are the stories I was told. I think Dr. Nyan can relate. They cook for you and give you food, and this food you eat it at once, and there's an impending epidemic that is coming, and they say everybody in the town or in the village come around this place and eat this food. After eating it, you are protected against all these things that come. Do you think those people that we look at as a country doctor, do they have some ideas about vaccination, or what is it that they're trying to do there?
Well, certainly. We did talk about Edward Jenner. We talk about Pasteur. Today, when you talk about science and innovation, we talk about Einstein. Before those people, there were a lot of innovation going on in Africa, the cradle of civilization. Inotep, for example, came up with he could be practically, arguably considered as the father of surgery, the father of medicine, but we hear Socrates today and other people. Certainly, there are a lot of things that, a lot of herbal derivatives that people back in the days in Africa and Latin America, because the Latin Americans also practice, herbal medicine, including the Asians as well. In a sense, one could consider that, but whatever their contents were, no one knew. It was never documented. And we can say that there's some observational studies. For example, if we talk about toxicology, which is part of the whole vaccine situation, because we look at tetanus toxoid.
Yeah.
Our old people, they created certain herbs, and they were able to utilize that to prevent against like snake bite when you were bitten by a snake, so that the toxin from the snake does not affect you. We can look at even herbs that they found to be toxic. So they would advise everybody in the community that do not eat this leaf, do not eat that leaf, because if you eat it, it will be, you will die. Imagine how many observations they did before they came to that conclusion. So in their own light, they were in a way scientific, except that these things were not documented, so we don't know today. For what you were saying, yes, those things happen in the traditional sense, but again, we are in the modern days. We don't want to discount those. And that is why in this sphere and time, we continue to also, again, when it comes to policy, advocate for this traditionally based medicine to be studied, that financial and other resources should be given so that these things are studied, so that we can know, the ingredients, the scientific ingredients in there, and refine them and utilize them. Probably somebody else can take it from there.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I look at it from a cultural perspective, and medicine or science, before science became generally accepted, it was all about cultural practice and what people have observed that are happening. So that's why there have been resistance in some culture to accept vaccine. So we'll talk about, that later, about how people accept. And importantly, like you talk about people using herbs and different medication, or what's in those herbs and what their chemistry that can help the body to, either create toxin for the body or also help the body. So two things I always learn: that medicine can hurt, it can also help. So, but basically we'll go into looking at the chemistry of some of the commonly used vaccines, in Liberia. We talk about one of them. You there?
Yeah, I want to make one quick point.
Yeah. Kalilu, come in.
Yep. I want us to try to not to mix the vaccine and therapy, because vaccine is given when you are not sick. They give it to prevent you from getting sick of that particular pathogen. For therapy, you already have the disease, and then they give you that treatment, like the control medicine. So maybe we will confuse our viewer. We should focus on vaccine, because therapy is different from vaccine. Vaccine is given when you don't have the disease. Therapy is given when you have the disease. So like that. Before they get confused about control medicine and vaccine, is two different things. I just want to make it clear.
That's a great point. And
yes,
and understand.
Right, and I definitely accept the point you made, and that is why I try as much as possible for our audience and ourselves to distinguish where we were going, because like I said, I gave the example of the snake bite. People were given certain herbal markings and injected certain things into them to prevent snake bites. Yeah. And from their observation, they said it worked. But again, like we said, it was never documented. Yeah. So we really don't know, and we don't know the content. So, we try to delineate the area where they use herbs for treatment and the area where they use herbs for some sort of preventive mechanism.
Great point. And with a lot of things surrounding therapy and using herbs, we will come to those things to talk about, because my main concern is the issue of chemistry. How does the body accept these things based on the body chemistry and what is in and what is contained in these materials, particularly for vaccines that we're talking about today. We know commonly used vaccines in Liberia. I'm not sure about the policy of some of the vaccines that are still being used and the content of those vaccines. All right. For example, the BCG vaccines. We're going to talk a little bit about the chemistry so that our viewers can see what we're talking about, So I'm not sure what's going on with my computer.
Okay, hold on. Let me.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
So
don't share screen.
Let me. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if you are just joining us, this is Focus on Liberia. Welcome to Chemistry and Society. What we're doing right now, our topic is the chemistry of vaccines. Welcome back to our broadcast, Chemistry and Society. The topic today, the chemistry of vaccines development. The presenter, Dr. Saki Golafale, our guest, Dr. Dougbeh Nyan, joining us from the state of Maryland, and Mr. Kalilu Donzo. Gentlemen, as we come back to break, I mean, you have talked all the beautiful things about vaccine. With all the things, why is there so much misconception or conspiracies about vaccines? Where does that come from? Yeah, Donzo, you can start.
Man, conspiracy, man, it's all about money and politics. That's what I can say. That's the two key words, money and politics. Yeah, it's money and politics. I think that the young can come in and
the pushback against vaccine from several quarters, and the situation we have with some people having fear about vaccine. I think primarily it has to do with certain level of ignorance.
All right.
Because they don't understand how vaccines are made, how they work, how they respond, and so that they come up with these theories that these people are coming to inject us, or this is coming to kill us, and all of the other theories you can think about it.
Yeah.
The second thing is definitely the political aspect of it in terms of policy implementation, where there is not much education and awareness in certain population about the benefits of vaccines. So that's the second major thing I will put it to. I mean, you can bring in the economic aspect of it and other things, but these two things, I think, create particularly the ignorance surrounding the science is where mainly I think the pushback against vaccine lie. Take for instance, during the Ebola virus outbreak, irrespective of the fact that in West Africa, I'm only dealing with West Africa, that we have had vaccines given to us from like our ages now, from childhood. Even our parents took, BCG vaccine.
Dr. Nyan, let me hold you on the first point. Because it's very important when you talk about ignorance. That is why we need to, always discuss these things. That and the issue of ignorance in the science, it boils down to what is in this thing that I'm taking. Some people claim that some vaccines are there to keep them barren, or they will not bear children. Some people have different impression about how vaccine does. So we'll look at some of the commonly used vaccines in Liberia from childbirth to now, and there are different chemistry. What is in them? There are some active and inactive ingredients. And of course, there are some chemical compounds that I'm concerned about, all right? Particularly when we look at BCG, all right? The BCG is the tuberculosis vaccine, right? And if you look in that vaccine, you have some components. And I'm not sure, I haven't read much of why they add some compounds to the vaccine after they've done taking either the live or the virus that have been, or bacteria that have been killed and placed in the vaccine. They have some other compounds, different ingredients like citric acid, potassium phosphate. So, and one of the things that caught my attention about why I would raise concern about certain vaccine. If you look at what the vaccine in the polio vaccine, a lot of kids around the world have taken polio vaccine. And one of the things I saw in polio vaccine is formaldehyde. Formaldehyde is a chemical, it's an organic compound. And in Liberia, we normally call formaldehyde as formaldehyde. That's the way people call it, formaldehyde, but it's actually formaldehyde. So considering the safety issue, the safety concern of formaldehyde, it's in a lot of vaccines. Why these components are added to the vaccine, knowing their safety concern? As a chemist, that's what I will raise. That's the concern I will raise about formaldehyde and different other components in the vaccine.
Right. To hold you there, or to build on what you've just said, I work with the biotech industry as well and gather a lot of manufacturing experience. What happens is that when these vaccines are made, or when certain products are made in that sense that are going into our biological system, our biology, there are certain chemical components that are included as ingredients. One, for preservatives.
Good. Okay.
Citric acid is a very good preservative. Okay. You remember we talked earlier on about the various classes of vaccines, the live attenuated, and we didn't even talk about the other ones, the DNA vaccines and all of that, the nucleic acid vaccines. Now, formaldehyde, radiation, and heat are the three major things that are used to attenuate those live pathogens.
Yeah.
So when you see formaldehyde, what is done is that it is put in, and as you the chemists know, at a particular concentration that will not harm the body, but will keep the virus or the bacteria, whatever it is, continuously attenuated. So from the manufacturing standpoint, that is why it is like that. And radiation, for example, you know that radiation harms a lot, but the radiation is not used on us. Instead, it is used on, again, the pathogen, the infectious pathogen.
So the formaldehyde we're talking about is a scene that is used in a funeral home to preserve bodies, right?
Formaldehyde is formaldehyde.
Yeah, so just to get people to understand that these things can be used, in different ways. And
I was pointing out something. That is why I think we'll go on to clinical trials also. We introduced that earlier when we did the introduction. And that is why vaccines and all of the medications that we take have to go through clinical trials. The first thing that is looked for as scientists like ourselves and the population as well is to find out whether these compounds are safe to come into our body. We look for safety first. That is the phase 1 trial. The next trial is if it is effective against the particular pathogen or the particular disease that it is claimed, to be made for. So is this vaccine effective to prevent polio? Then we go for its effectiveness. In the process of testing its effectiveness, we again look back on the safety, because at that point, during the testing for effectiveness, you have to use different doses again to see, okay, at what dose is it safe for the human body at a particular length of time, and to continue to elicit that immunity, that defense that we are looking for to fight against a future invading pathogen, infectious pathogen.
Great. And talking about clinical trials, now it takes us to talking about what's currently obtaining with COVID-19 vaccines. And as you may know, there's been a huge rush, an unprecedented rush to develop a vaccine. I've never seen that vaccine development, a rush of this kind. So the issue of safety, the chemistry of the vaccine, they are of big concerns. Yesterday, a very hot paper was published.
Dr. Golafale, can I stop you? Because when we get into that, I know we're going to be submerged into it because it's very hot, as you said. Our viewers are commenting. They want to even call in. So I want to read some comments, and if you can respond to some of those comments.
All right, great.
Move forward. Okay. The first comment comes from Proposem. Proposem is so elated. He said, kudos to Liberia for producing brilliant minds like these two, real heroes flying the flag of Liberia through brilliance. Teresa Fatoma, and Teresa made a couple of comments so she knows what she's talking about here. She said, do you think that all those vaccines were very helpful to Africa? And it comes to the conspiracy and what we're talking. And I want you guys to also note the history of vaccine. there were some things we heard in the US about people creating vaccine to do certain things. So I don't think the fear or these myths are just in a vacuum. There's some history associated. But let me read a few more comments. Teresa also saying breastfeeding is the best vaccine in the world. In case your body didn't recognize, it's I did biomedical and I understand the body well. Okay, that's what I was talking about, because Teresa is making a few comments and it tells me that she knows what she's talking about. Melvin Morris, every so-called vaccine against virus is harmful. I reread that. Every so-called vaccine against virus is harmful. I will exceed the case of bacteria. We go another comment here. This one from Dave Jar. If viruses are constantly changing in their DNA, thus making it impossible to have a lasting vaccine, don't you think the money spent on developing a single vaccine to combat one strain of a virus is wasteful spending, instead of using such resources on strengthening immunities or prevention? We are bent on spending billions. Kebe Soso, good point. Many of us have different reactions to medication. So let's be mindful of how we educate our people on the modern vaccine that is being created. And the last one, Siafat Morris, in the Liberian society, are consumers made aware of the chemical components of vaccine? Saki, that's your job.
Yeah, so I think we'll talk about that later, because that has to do with the issue of the regulation. We'll talk about the African Regulatory Agency, but our guests can respond to some of those questions and we can pick up from that.
Let me come in, right? If you look at vaccine development, right? If you look at vaccine development, what these company doing? They will identify a particular part of that particular pathogen, right? Like in the case of, let's say, in the case of Zima, or in the case of this Ebola vaccine they prepare, they use genetic engineering to produce the vaccine. That's what they use. These chemicals we are talking about, so formaldehyde, sorbitol, citric acid, potassium, these chemicals, they are just there to keep the vaccine viable, to keep them for longer time, to keep the pH, and then to preserve it. That's what these chemicals are there for. And most of these chemicals, they are naturally occurring in our body, and some are also in the food that we eat. Sorbitol is in the chewing gum. We have sorbitol in the chewing gum. It's there. So it's that they're gonna screen something. That's why these vaccines will go through different phases. You don't see vaccine go to third phase and start human trial, and you don't pass the different regulatory bodies. So there's no way, and there's no vaccine. Vaccine normally you have mild infection like fever, headache. That is obvious, because once you have a particular pathogen coming to your body, that's the first reaction your body do. That's what the innate immune response do. Inflammation, that's what it do. That's what happens. So it's obvious, but I don't want people to take it to say vaccine is a conspiracy theory. Spending money to save life is, you already have these things. People spending money to save life doesn't mean that they are wasting money. They're not wasting money. They're trying to save humanity, because they have lot, and again, I will blame the policy maker, because they should have enough awareness among the people, most especially Africans. We have that kind of mentality that people want to come and just go and kill us and just end all the African race. And these are all myths. Once you understand science, you won't really, you will just be baffled of all these things they say. Yeah, I just want to make that point. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
To address a few things from the comments that were made from the viewers, I gave thumbs up to the lady who made a comments about breastfeeding. That is about one of the first immunity, naturally occurring vaccination that we gave our offsprings when they are born. All mammals do that.
Yeah.
The first thing is the breastfeeding. And there are a lot of immune components within the breast milk that confers the first set of immunity on the child when they're born. Nevertheless, that immunity is not sufficient. That is why we have, in places where you don't have good medical care, like our kind of countries, you have high child mortality in the face of high breastfeeding. You see where the problem is. The second thing is some of the fears around vaccines and medications and clinical trials, and I'm saying some of the fears are justified, particularly for a race of people, the Black race, the African race, that have been so exploited, so repressed over the centuries, taken to slavery, dehumanized. In the process of that, during the infamous Tuskegee trial, when there was this trial for syphilis, they put, however way they divided the trial groups, the subjects, they made the blacks to go without medication. They use them as quote unquote a kind of placebo as we know it today, and they die. That trial was unethical, and it created a lot of ill awareness. Let me put it that way. That was an awareness in itself, but it was kind of ill awareness. And so the Black population and other people of humanity became afraid of trials, with medicine, with vaccines. So that is why I said to some extent, those fears are in a way justified when it comes to using a particular race in a segregative manner. And that is why when our French colleagues, two of our French colleagues in recent times during the this coronavirus pandemic, made a statement that, well, we have the coronavirus vaccine, let's go and try it on those Africans, in that kind of condescending manner. Right. Yeah. It was a kind of, the manner in which they stated their case made it very condescending and portrayed it as racist. But if you look at what Kalilu said initially, that vaccines are given to people who are not sick, because so that when the sickness comes, it will prevent you. When you look at the population or case fatality rate presently, Africa has the lowest case fatality rate in general when you compare, the continental COVID-19 case fatality. All right. Yeah. So there are not many people accordingly. I mean, there are people who are asymptomatically infected, which we still need to find out. But given the statistics we have now, it appears that there are not many people infected in Africa. So we rather, trying the vaccine for the global population on a population that is not highly infected. Right. Scientifically, it makes sense. But the condescending manner in which it was stated, and that is why I also came out indicating that trials that will be done for coronavirus vaccine must be done ethically, and it must be done on the basis of adhering to international standards, and it must be a multi-center trial. So I just wanted to address those few questions in general, and Saki, you can take over from that.
So, when you talk about race, when I read the paper that was published yesterday on the Lancet, it mentioned that the first trial was done mostly on the white people. In the UK, it was done on white people. That they I think intentionally used that word white. Right. So, and just to clear this whole doubt about their intention to selectively go and do it on Africans. But right now they are doing a trial in Brazil and South Africa. But we're addressing some of the questions that has to do with policy issues and whether people know the chemistry of the vaccine that they're taking. That's a huge, thing we need to address, especially in Africa, where people just take vaccine without knowing the whole body chemistry, whether they are allergic to certain things in the vaccine. It's not known. But coming to COVID-19, vaccine for COVID is a hot topic. And I wanted us to address certain things, especially when we're talking about the chemistry of the vaccine. So what I read in this paper was that they did a trial. They came out with their conclusion that the vaccine is tolerated. the body, you know, and it has minor side effects. But those minor side effects were showing up on every, you know, plot of their graphs and things. So one of the things they use to reduce the side effect was they administered paracetamol to the participants. And they observed that those who took paracetamol had showed low side effect than those who did not take paracetamol. So the question about the whole chemistry here, and it was also mentioned that people who are allergic to paracetamol are more likely will not be qualified to take the vaccine yet at this trial stage. So how do we answer the question about using paracetamol if it reach a point where paracetamol has to be used to cut down the side effects? How do we help people who are allergic to paracetamol?
Well, paracetamol is a drug used against fever and against headache as well. So it's something that we've used over the years, you know, in our part of the world, Africa. I think the equivalence to that in the Western world in the United States is Tylenol, which is acetaminophen. You know, there's that group, is that class of drug, right? That's what I'm saying. That's the, you know, relative to that.
Yeah.
Okay. When vaccines are administered, there are reactions. The reaction could be local, it could be internal. Local means those of us who took the tuberculosis vaccines, you know, back in the days, you see that on your shoulder there will be some swelling. Let's put it that way, simply, so that people understand. And our moms, you know, brought a towel, hot towel, and you know that's the inflammation. So at the site of injection, there will be an inflammation. Okay. Now, remember, paracetamol has an effect against pain, okay? It has an effect against headache. And to some extent, you may say it can reduce swelling in a way, because it is through the chemicals that the swelling produces that causes the pain. So that's why paracetamol is given. Now, there are other class of drugs which are called antiphlogistic drugs. Those drugs are the ones that are against swelling, you know, inflammation. Right. My hope would have been that the fact that our colleagues who did these studies saw that they had to give one group paracetamol to reduce the side effect, I have hope that probably they could have also given some other class of drug, you know, in the same area to another group to see those who cannot tolerate paracetamol, if that group can then, you know, tolerate then the vaccine and with the same limited side effects. I hope that would have been done. Probably together we can do a letter to the editor and raise those concerns because we can do that.
And so in the screening for participants, they usually do tests for allergic reaction. And
exactly.
So, and that made them to conclude that, okay, they can use paracetamol in certain group,
right?
Paracetamol, non-paracetamol, other group. So that is an important thing we can look into. Right.
They had to do the exclusion and inclusion criteria in their recruitment. Right. So those are very valid, you know, scientific points that I think our answer to it is that hopefully they have used some other, you know, drug which is like an antiphlogistic drug, or probably they could have, you know, based on their exclusion criteria, maybe they could have also used aspirin. Who knows? You know?
So I think we will continue the conversation on that because it's still in our early stage. But again, we have to educate our people and what this whole vaccine thing about. There is still concern about the rush. So normally when you listen to Dr. Fauci answering questions about the normal time vaccines are developed, up to 6 to 7 years, it goes a long period. So considering that, they look at everything about safety, compatibility, the participants' biochemical or body chemistry and how it correlates with the vaccine, match well. All those things they look at over the years. And we'll talk about the Ebola vaccine, but just to close this whole thing on the COVID-19, considering the rush for vaccine, what are your fears? What do you anticipate concerning your background in the science, in immunity, infection, and also your long history of looking at how these diseases are combated?
Yeah. So my point is, if you look at these COVID is respiratory, and most of these respiratory vaccine, like the flu shot, most of these things, nobody go for like a period of a year. So, I mean, my point is, if they want to produce any vaccine coming out should have like a long-lasting span, because if you look at the disease, it quick to spread. You know what I mean? Quick to spread. So, in order to able to not cross the economy anymore, we need to find a vaccine that will go for a longer time. Maybe 48 months, at least 18 months, at least. But for now, trust me, once the vaccine can show 90%, Fauci said it. Once they can show 90%, they were misled, because right now the people need a vaccine because I mean, people need it because they have to solve the problem at the moment. So they need it. And again, if you go back to the three phases of vaccine development. So right now they're relaxing all these phases because they want the vaccine. So I mean, the rush is obvious, but then we have to be very careful how we do the rush. We have to follow the procedure, the standard procedure set for vaccine development. That's my point. They should look up for some of the drugs that came up. Most of the drugs that can these are antiviral drugs, because these drugs, what a drug does, they try to stop the viral replication, because once the virus is not replicating, there's no way that it can, and it will give more time to our immune cells, to fight the little that are there. But once they are replicating to different cells spreading up, it will going to give our body enormous work to do. So that's why these drugs, this therapy will be for now. For me personally, right now, this vaccine are coming up, they might not go for longer term. It will not be for longer term. So the focus should be now both on the therapy and the vaccine together.
They stated in a paper that they do not have idea of the duration, so that has not been studied yet. So,
right.
But yeah,
right. But I want to give some optimism here. Science and technology is far advanced than it was 50 years ago. Just 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Science and technology is far advanced. I mean, we are able to develop the vaccine right on the computer, a model.
Yeah.
That we didn't have just 25 years ago. We couldn't really do that.
Yeah.
So while there will be cautionary note, you can rest assured that a lot of things are being done ethically. And that is why we continue to stress, science and technology and medicine is one area that really does a lot in adhering to ethics, in adhering to standards. Politicians don't adhere to standards. They don't, advocates do, but politicians, you can question that. That's another story for another day. But the situation here is, with the advancement in science and technology, we are able to fast track a lot of things now than we used to do before. Before, for example, it used to take all this long time, but now we are able to utilize different various compounds, do a lot of in vitro, meaning do a lot of studies right in the laboratory, immediately know what the plausible answer will be. And we can then go towards the human trials. So while it's true that science and technology has advanced and it can help us to propel these kind of studies, I would accept also that we continue to adhere to ethics and standards.
Great point, great points. Mr. Jai, you had something to say.
Right, and that's as we kind of wind down, I want us to bring ourselves back to the topic, which is the chemistry of vaccine. What is it that is in vaccine that is doing what? And why is that important? Why is it that we're supposed to know that? I think, and then it will go to also our policymaker. What do we need to be aware of when it comes to the chemistry of vaccine? Why do we know that? And how can that knowledge help for us to either accept a vaccine, don't accept it, and for our policymakers to decide that, oh, okay, we can use it, or we don't just want to depend on the on the ethics that Dr. Nyan talked about and say, let's just accept it because we believe that those guys will be ethical. So what's about the chemistry that we're supposed to be reading anytime we say vaccine? Where do I supposed to look and why?
Well, again, when we talk about science and technology being held to higher standards, it's not only the scientists and the medical doctors and the biotechs alone that hold themselves to that standard. We allow ourselves to be held to that standard by the public. That is why we have the Institutional Review Board, which has non-scientific people on it, people of different professional background that will bring to bear the interests of the community specifically. That is why we have the Data Safety Monitoring Board. So there are these checkpoint mechanisms that are always put in place when drugs are being developed and going on studies for us, and vaccines are being developed and going through studies for us. For our consumption, for our safety. What is required is that I believe the awareness, and we continue to come right back to the question of the awareness. If our people or the population is made aware adequately about what these vaccines are and what all these compounds are, they are simplified to them. Like we were talking about some of the preservatives that are in these vaccines, citric acid, for example. That's something you can get from sucking orange.
Yeah.
That's something you can get from sucking grapefruit. So it's the same compound that is in there to help to preserve. So if you can explain these things in the simplest form to the population, it will erase a lot of fear. The second thing is, I will take the example from the Ebola vaccine trial. I was a member of the Data Safety Monitoring Board. Dr. Stephen Kennedy and the rest were in Liberia. They were carrying out the studies. They were the principal investigators. They didn't know what they were, giving because it was blinded. We knew what was happening. The Data Safety Monitoring Board always knows, so that it knows that if something is going wrong, it can immediately put a stop to the trial. You are there to protect the population and not necessarily the science. Basically.
Great.
Right. And so before that vaccine was injected into anybody, the population was also told that this trial is not only going on in Liberia and Sierra Leone and Guinea. The trial is also going on in the United States and I think somewhere in Europe as well. So it was a multi-center trial to erase that fear that, it's only us Africans that they are doing this trial on. The third thing is those who were leading the trials and some of the policymakers were the first to take that vaccine. Dr. Stephen Kennedy, I believe, took it. Dr. Francis Kete, who is the current deputy minister, who is the chief medical officer, he also took it. and other people, who were within the policy-making area, they took it in order to erase the fear. So if these three components that I have named, including others that I have not named, are emphasized and implemented adequately to make our population aware, I think it will reduce the level of fear.
Yeah, Dr. Nyan, that was very excellent points. But I just want to hold you on when you talk about the regulation and the trial of Ebola vaccine in Liberia. We all know that Ebola vaccine, the Everball, was approved by FDA last December. And but I read the paper from the African Vaccine Regulatory Forum that talks about Liberia's participation. There was Guinea, or I think Ghana, a lot of countries around for the different trials. But it stated that the trial in Liberia did not complete. So being part of on the team to do that trial, what's your take on why Liberia did not complete the trial?
It is not that Liberia did not complete the trial. Remember, at the time the trial was going on, all of the regulations were put in place because we tried to put in place all of the checkpoints. By the time all of that was done, simultaneously, there was an effort to stop the virus, to stop the outbreak. We were not only waiting for vaccine to stop it, just as we are doing currently with COVID-19. We're not waiting for vaccine to stop COVID-19. The very regulations that have been put in place are the ones we are emphasizing: wearing your mask, keeping your social distance, etc., etc. Now, by the time all of those regulations were put in place, and the U.S. soldiers came and mounted their efforts in order to help us get rid of that virus, a lot of the time was consumed, and by then the cases were winding down. So it needed another huge population and another length of time. When the Ebola virus epidemic was curbed, at the same time, almost around the same time, there was an outbreak in the Congo, the DRC Congo. As you will note, Ebola virus itself first broke out in the DRC Congo, which was then Zaire back then. In 1976. And since then, before the Ebola virus outbreak in West Africa, there were over 15 to 20, outbreaks in the region, including in South Africa, different little outbreaks. And so it is not unusual that we would have seen another outbreak there. So when it broke out, the data, and just to say, the trial in Liberia, Guinea, West Africa, let me just put it, West Africa, and the United States and Europe produced some plausible data. Number one, it did prove that the vaccine was safe, which is the first thing we want to know.
Yeah.
So, and it did prove some level of efficacy. But because the virus, the viral outbreak wound down, it was then shifted. The trial also was then shifted. The same data and the same protocols, more or less in a refined form, was shifted to the DRC Congo. And the trials continued there. And today we have an Ebola vaccine. The next stages of the trial phases were carried out in the DRC Congo. And we now have an Ebola vaccine certified and approved by the US FDA.
Good. So we will continue this conversation because a lot of things rest on the issue of policymakers on how our people's awareness about the vaccines they take, because that's the key thing. People have to know what they're taking and what their body chemistry is like, and before they take anything, like they do during the trials, they do test everyone's blood, do everything. But when the vaccines are going to the poor countries, nobody cares about who's allergic to what's in it. People just take it because they have funding for them, and people have to implement the programs for vaccine immunization. But we'll leave that for another time to talk about policies and how people's knowledge about the difference. And just to we wind it down, we'll soon be closing. We wanted to just get your closing thoughts on on Liberia's biomedical research and what's the future like? What do you see, and how can we tap into the different scientific disciplines, chemistry, biology, molecular biology, infection immunity, and all those sciences that can come together to build our own our centers for research in producing vaccines or even drugs in the future. What are your closing remarks on those points? Kalilu?
Yeah. Before going there, I mean, let me just make, since people are listening, let me just make one point on the COVID outbreak. Yeah. I think what's going on in our country back home, we have COVID is there, right? So you're talking about medical research. I mean, I don't know the capacity in terms of finance or in terms of hemo, I don't know, but I think we should firstly identify whether the COVID strain that is in Liberia is the same as in America. What's the COVID strain that is in Europe is the same in Liberia, because we are getting all our reagents, all our probe from America or from Europe, wherever they're coming from. So if we say we are doing testing and these people have different strain of COVID, and we see that they are primer to target this COVID in our testing back home, it means that we'll be grabbing false positive and false negative. I think it's better. That's just a simple thing. I mean, not simple, but it requires people that know it, and it requires a lot of funding. But you have to give the idea. I think it's better. That's just a gist of the research we can do back home. There, we can do the kind of test. And secondly, we can also look at those people that we say the so-called recover, and then they are catching the virus back. So we can look at them and try to see whether these people they develop antibody for that particular COVID. So we can do the kind of study. And trust me, all around the world, research is centered around the state university. University should be there to meet national needs. That's what the university should be there for. So we should always encourage our government to put in more into research, more especially at the university end, because there where we are training scientists. So once we have those things coming in to the university, because first of all, you have to have the facility. You have to have a lab. That's the first thing. You can't tell me to say, try to network and bring partner back home where they're going to work. Where they're going to work. So you have to have the facility first. Once the facility is there, you can tell somebody, say, oh, the people want to do research. Like right now, people like what I'm working on, they are doing partner research with Ghana. They're doing TB study with Ghana. They're doing partner research because they know Ghana do the work there. They can do the sequencing at the University of Legon. They do it there. So when it comes to biomedical research, we have to do it at the university level. And luckily for us, we have introduced these biomedical science BSc at the university level now. So these students should be exposed to, doing the actual research. We can do the simple thing, these country medicine, simple thing. We can start with this simple thing. But we can't do the simple thing. We need to have the infrastructure, just simple info. We just need a running water. I mean, we just need this thing. It will take our time, but in order to do a research, you need to do investment. Nothing you can do. You can't do nothing by it. I can't do anything by it because I don't have the money for that. You know what I mean? So government, I know government have the money, but we have to look into that kind of direction, providing money. At least every budget year, provide money into the source the university in terms of doing these things. You know what I mean? And if you don't put a rep there, if you get the money, they're going to pay that all the money. They're not doing it anyway. That's the point.
So,
Kalilu starting.
Great, Kalilu. And you don't have the money, but you have the knowledge. And we'll tap into the knowledge you have to build infrastructure.
And Dr. Golafale, there's an answer here for the point Kalilu raised. I know Dave just said the university are for Amanda away to they are not for research. and I hope we have part B, because I know Dr. Nyan can answer that because he was doing that same way too at the
Dr. Nyan, your closing comment in terms of biomedical research, where Liberia stand, what we see for the future.
I want to say that Liberia and Africa as a whole is, they are not short of talents. we have enormous talents in the country and outside of the country, on the continent and outside of the continent, that have the will to contribute to the biomedical and technological upliftment of the continent and our individual countries. The will to provide the resources in terms of material and financial has not come forth from most of the African governments. Why is it that Rwanda can do that and Liberia cannot do it? It puzzles me that my students, high school students that come into my lab to do their high school internship, are able to extract or DNA or RNA. We teach them those things. They are able to perform a PCR, a qPCR that can amplify that little DNA to make it bigger. And a student almost at the brink of graduating with a BSc in Liberia have never ever isolated a DNA. They never seen what it means to run it on a gel. How do we live with that? It has to do with the lack of the vision to produce the necessary policy measures and implementation that will take our countries and the continent from where it is to where it should be. Now we are talking about the vaccines, the vaccines, the vaccines. Who's developing these vaccines? There is now one entity on the African continent that is developing vaccine. Even when we talk about the test kits, only a few countries, two, not just few, two have been able to come out to say, hey, we have developed test kits for COVID-19. That's Senegal, that's Ghana, because their governments were able to push in some resources towards that effect. If you go to Senegal, they have sprouting research institutions. You go down South Africa, the same thing. So in West Africa, Nigeria is doing a good job. But what's about the rest of the ECOWAS countries and our own country, Liberia? This is where the problem is. If we can harness the resources, meaning the mind, the brains that we have in the country and outside of the country, look, put me in our own Liberian term. My man, we got smart people in our country. I'm not joking, but they have to be supported, Yeah. And that is where much of my advocacy also lie. Yes, at the university, we did the Amanda Awetu. And that same Amanda Awetu continues in having me to serve as an example for our people today. Because it did strengthen me. The Amanda Awetu meant we want progress. We want to advance. That is a South African language, or Zulu or something language. Yeah. All right. We want to make progress. And so that battle cry should never be overlooked. It is overlooked today because the situation at which the university stands is far less than the standard of the University of Liberia yesterday. Great. And that is why it's been overlooked. But there was excellence in research at the University of Liberia. Oh, where is Dr. Ward? May his soul rest in peace. There was good research in chemistry. I'm calling Dr. Ward because he's in your area.
Yeah. That's an icon. He's an icon. He was an icon.
Exactly. T.J. Arrow Faulkner, back in the days, all right? These were people of great scientific minds that Liberia sent out, I think his name was Carter. He came into the United States and he was at Harvard. He was one of those who was instrumental in classifying Alzheimer. I hope I got the name right. Yes. To my own understanding, he might have come up with that invention, that discovery. But again, being somebody from Liberia, you're here, you're working with Nyan German or Alzheimer, and he's the head of the lab, so they take the name. And we have to go back to studying those things. Our talent is being drained, and those of us who are out and in, we want to reverse the brain drain. And only us can do that.
Great.
If the vaccines are made today, as we are saying, they will be sold to us. We will be at the mercy of philanthropic organizations like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Jack Ma Foundation. Where is our government? We did get, what, $30 million loan recently? You will think that they would take maybe just 10 million and invest it into one of the companies that are making these vaccines and say, look, we are investing 10 million into you. When these vaccines are made, we want it at the cheapest price. In fact, you will think that the government presently, and I hope they are listening. I just hope they are listening. You will think that they will take some of that money and invest it again into buying maybe 4 million doses. Negotiate with the companies, negotiate with the foundations and say, look, we have $4 million. Which foundation can match our $4 million? We want 4 million doses for our 4.5, 5 million people. We will be covered. But where is that money going? How is it being appropriated? And when you talk about these, they say you've been political. That's not being political. We're only streamlining the policies. I will end there and hope that our policymakers are listening to make science and technology a priority, to make agriculture a priority, open their eyes and be much more visionary so that we can move our continent forward. Rwanda is an example. If Rwanda can do it, we can do it. Thank you very much.
Great. If Rwanda can do it, we can do it. The key point.
Dr. Golafale, before you come in, I just want to piggyback on what Dr. Nyan said about we get smart people in that country. I want to use Dr. Saki Golafale as an example. I was here and sorry for me putting you on the spot, Dr. Golafale, because I was right here in Atlanta, Georgia when he arrived. Okay, we were in the leadership of the Liberian Association right here. And he came from Liberia with a bachelor degree, already working in lab and chemistry and doing things that you would not believe that at a time. How long has it been? Maybe 6 years or so?
Yeah, 6.5 years. Yeah, almost.
Right. Now, at a time, you wouldn't think they are possible in Liberia, but he was doing them exactly. He was doing those things in Liberia. And because we talked ever since he came, and I was here, we're having meetings, and he came, his neck was so dry, so when he wear his shirt, he got a bottle here like this. He combined his master's degree and his doctorate degree, chemistry, for crying out loud. And this guy came from Liberia. At a time, the school system was declared a mess. And you have someone like Dr. Saki Golafale coming from there, going to Kalilu University and getting a PhD in chemistry. And he doesn't even know talking. He sleep, drink, and breathe it. And the idea of even having this program, I talked to him. I said, Dr. Golafale, it was in Maria College, 11th grade. I actually understood. I was always in the top 2 students, right? Or top 3 to be more. But I did not understand something as basic as 3 feet equal 1 yard, 4 quarts equal 1 liter. I memorized it. I did a conversion. I scored 100, but I did not understand because nobody showed me what really that meant. Until my chemistry professor or chemistry teacher, Mr. Kusperiba, peace be to his ashes, one day, maybe by mistake, he said, well, when we say 4 quarts equal a liter, you take 4 of this cup water here, you put it in this bottle, which is a quart, it will fill it. I said, seriously, that's what it means? You get smart people in Liberia.
Yeah,
back to you, Dr. Golafale.
We do. Thank you for that, for putting me on the spot. But on a serious note, I picked up a lot of important points from Dr. Nyan and it's a Donzo concerning investment. If you don't invest, you don't get anything, in return. You always be at the receiving end of it, and whether it is of poor quality or not. And the essence of this program is to actually not only to educate our viewers or our population out there who need the education, but to also challenge policymakers. That science requires investment. To have a population that is healthy, you have to invest in science and technology research. I spent 6.5 years doing research funded by the Department of Energy.
Right.
Yes, I have to go present every year, go and present my findings. And until the government cut funding on carbon emission and climate change, because of some regime and policy issue. But investment in science and technology can raise the country's level academically, health-wise, socioeconomic. It can boost the economy. If you don't know, check it out. All of the countries that are investing in research, America is at the top of investment in research. Their investment in research cannot go in vain. Somebody made a comment that people are investing billions of dollars. It's a waste. No. Research, you either get a result, a good or bad result. They are all results. People use it to learn and use their findings to improve on their research. Right now, the trials that are going on is the same research. They are looking at what the problems are, what the effects are, so they can look at the side effects, whether it's major or minor, and then they go back to their research and see how they can solve that problem to bring the vaccine to us who are always on the receiving end. So, it's important to have these discussions, and we'll continue to have this conversation. We believe that our policymakers will be listening. They will take key notes and make sure that we all work towards making Liberia or Africa a great place to live. Science and technology rule the world. Whether you like it or not, that's the thing we have to invest in. As a scientist, I just want to say this, that I'm so impressed with my two Liberian colleagues, professionals out there, Dr. Chris Nyan. I'm so impressed. Thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for accepting our invitation to be here. We'll talk about these things more and more. There are a lot of things you said that we'll talk about again to expand on the discussion. And Mr. Donzo, I know it's late in the UK. I can see the eyes are sleepy. You have to go to bed. And so thank you for being up to educate our people on the importance of science and investment. And I also want to tell our listeners, this program, our viewers, this program is meant to bring science, technology, chemistry, physics, biology, everything to you. To make you understand, it's not just a classroom thing that we score the hundreds, we score the A's, but it's a real life thing that's making the world moving today. You're waiting for the vaccines. The scientists are working right now. The knowledge we gain in chemistry, in biology, in biotechnology, that's what the people are using. When we come back home, we want to make use of the knowledge. We want to be utilized, So we need funding, we need support, we need an infrastructure. That's the essence of having this program, so we can engage people. Let me just let you know, next week is going to be very interesting topic. We're going to be engaging our ladies, our women, the female in STEM, for you to see how much these young women that have invested into science and the unknowns. Will bring out people who you don't know that, have gone up to doctorate level in STEM. So we actually want to expose Liberians, expose these different talents that, our government and policymakers can look at and see that there's a need to invest into science, research, and technology so that our bright minds can be attracted to come back home and invest and improve our country, our economy. I will now close on to just Mr. Jai. If you have anything last to say, we can all I will stop right here and give it over to you. So I want to thank you all again for viewing. Thank Mr. Kalilu Fariga. Thank I'm sorry for saying Fariga. It's the football name. Kalilu Donzo. The football name in my head. No, Kalilu Donzo, thank you very much for coming on. And Dr. Chris Nyan, we hope we'll have this conversation again in the future. Mr. Ja, it's up to you.
When you're talking about football, I hope I'm not talking to PC people here. So. But I want to thank you both, Dr. Nyan and Mr. Donzo, for your appearance. This tells me from the interaction that we need a part 2 to this, so that we can go more on the policy side and see what can be done. What are some of those things that will stop us or will help us and do these things that we are all talking about. On that note, I want to thank our viewers for tuning in. I know chemistry is not something easy to understand, but you hung in there with us and we try as much as possible to break it down. That's why I'm here, so that when they speak in the chemical language, I can break it down, and so if I'm understanding, definitely everybody going to get it. We want to thank you, and want to thank our man or Asuni CA in the back there. Thank you so much for the time. This Sunday, I still want to remind you that we're going to have our virtual Independence Day program right here on Focus on Liberia. We'll have some speakers speaking 5 minutes each on the topic reassessing Liberia's independence. In the true sense of independence when it comes to our economy, arts and culture, our health, and otherwise, are we really independent? And then Professor Dr. Patricia Jabe Wesley is going to be our national orator. You don't want to miss it. That's Sunday at 2 p.m. Until then, my name is Dennis Jah. On behalf of all of us here at Focus on Liberia, say have a good night and God bless you. Bye-bye for now.
Bye.
We are Liberia. Liberia is our home. Liberia people.
DJ House of Pain. Yes, I like this one.